Welcome everybody to today's market analysis and trade recap session, April the 15th, 2025. So today we actually did take a trade in the live session and we were 1 for 1 today on the trades we took, getting 284 ticks with the original risk to reward of around a 1-to-1, a later risk to reward of 1.61, originally actually targeting a 2 to 3 risk to reward, but exiting early due to signals of opposition and invalidation. So let's take a look at what exactly happened today and how we can capitalize that as a trader. So starting on the 4-hour, just to give you a bit of context within the market, right? We marked out all our liquidity levels. We had many liquidity levels to the downside, as well as we had this major liquidity level. But what was really interesting was when market opened, we pushed up into this supply zone, took this liquidity that was located inside the supply zone, and aggressively started to sell. There was no setups for that selling movement, but that does set up a lot of context for the remaining portion of the trade, right? So we also put our volume profile prior to the session, and let's go on the 1 hour so it's easier to see. On the volume profile, we're right around the point of control, and overall price action and structure does look like we're going to continue towards the upside. Now we do have multiple high volume nodes to be aware of, right? Let's take a look at this. Now if we keep our volume profile from the past, from there to there, we get around the same position with our high volume nodes still being at this area, also located nearby to this high liquidity level, as well as all these nodes below as well. That means that our closest liquidity levels, both up here, especially this one, and all of these down here, are very, very essential. Now moving down on the 1 hour, we essentially already discussed everything that we marked, right? Yeah, all the liquidity levels, and same goes for ES on the higher time frames. We just marked out all the liquidity levels prior to market open, and we quickly hopped on to the 15, 5-minute, 30-minute, and all of that to see the overall market context prior to market open as well. And on the 15-minute, let's see how it looks, right? 15-minute, we started making this bear flag style pattern, which does indicate further potential towards the upside, but again, never use patterns for your main source. We see that we come down over here, actually making a sort of lower low, but from this area we do see heavy buyer pressure occurring right around market open as well. At market open, we saw price come all the way up here, sweeping our upper liquidity that is also located inside our 1 hour for the day. When there's double confluences for selling pressure like such, especially in a supply zone that is on the higher time frame, that is a very big sign of confluence for the downside. But there wasn't any entry models for us to enter in the shorts over here, right? But once these shorts did occur, let's take a look at where we ended up. We ended up in our V2 levels, right? And we're still watching at these V2 levels. We start seeing the price is wicking up and so showing seller weakness essentially. And looking on the book map, which this time would be around 9:20. So let's shout out to Live Alex, the good book map once again. Okay, yeah, so this is how it looks, right? We've had major liquidity up at the highs, and where the highs are 5,500 on ES, and this is a key psychological level as well. This is our main target for the day if we're entering longs, unless we are invalidated. And as we're coming up from the V2 levels, what do we start to see? We start to see barriers form on both the downside and the upside, right? So actually today we did take 2 trades, but one of the trades essentially doesn't really count because it was reversed and we didn't lose much at all on it. But our first trade was actually shorting, and we shorted when we came up and tapped into this bearish fair value gap right there, and we wanted to see if we can head to lower liquidity simply based on the fact that we entered a supply zone and touched into liquidity, so liquidity to liquidity. But in reality, that did not follow the overall structure of the recent market at all, because the market recently has been making higher lows, and from this itself it should be pretty evident that we should be heading up unless invalidated. So taking further look into the market on bookmap, as I mentioned, we saw barriers forming on both the downside and the upside. But what do we start seeing happen? We start seeing the occurrence of a lot of buy stops occurring as we are focusing from this barrier, right? We've taken a short from this barrier already, and from that we see our play playing out a little bit. But as we come into these barriers, and this barrier right here, this barrier is a very, very strong barrier, 201 contracts, while our main target was only 273. That shows that this barrier could easily be a strong area of rejection, and as you come into it, we create a barrier above that that supports the bullish momentum and idea. After seeing that, we quickly reversed our shorts for essentially break even, and since we saw that bullish momentum occur with these icebergs and buy stops, we are expecting price to actually continue the trend and head towards 5,500, right? And that was where this trade setup came to play. What were our confluences? We saw on the higher time frame, the 15-minute, that we entered into our V2 levels. We had strong bookmap barriers. We had bookmap confluences. Price action demonstrated by these wicks, the higher lows, were additional confluence. And simply that there isn't much for sellers to target below, right? If there was something like 5,500 level down here somewhere with that much strength, which you could assume was that, but it's not really that much strength. If there was something with that much strength, let's say at 45425, then potentially we could have went towards the downside if it wasn't up here. But the occurrence of this being up there truly stands as a strong magnet. And remember what we said about magnets and barriers? Magnets drag the price towards them, while barriers act as strong rejection and pivot points. And there's internal reasoning for all this, and it's very important to look at the market context and know which is which. All of this is discussed in my crash course, which is free on the YouTube channel as well. So now we saw that price was entering and tapping into the barriers, we reversed our trade and entered in the longs, where we kept our stop loss relative to this strong barrier right here, a bit below around this area. And assuming our entry was there, we were targeting these highs right there, right? So we were targeting 5,500, which was actually this main liquidity level on ES, right? And that would have provided for a 1 to almost 4 risk to reward ratio, right? But 1,000 tick move is very, very difficult in the market, and we do understand that. So first TP is simply going to be to those highs. Now, what do we see happening that essentially makes us take profit down here, right? We take profit down there because through all of this upside move which we have been seeing, as demonstrated. Oh, and I forgot to mention one thing very special happened, right? And I can explain this as well. Simply by looking on Bookmap and looking back here, take a look at what happened. We came all the way up here, created a large amount of buy orders up there, and then started going down. And from this down move, we actually broke Bookmap structure towards the downside, right? And as you try coming up, big seller bubbles start to form and consider and start to break down, right? Now, you see this big bubble right there? That indicates that there's likely trapped buyers up at those highs. And when those buyers get stopped out, the price can crumble even more. And that is demonstrated by these sell stops right here. And we see our actual sell-off occurring at 5475-ish area, right? So we mark down on the side on our notes that we should be very careful at 5475 area because that was the area where sellers did become very present in the past recently, right? And literally right when we entered to that 5475 area on ES, we saw this huge spike down to the downside to our barrier level area. And near that barrier level area, we quickly saw a buyback up, so we did stay in the trade. So essentially what happened, our trade played out within 5 to 10 minutes, but then sellers came in and quickly flushed the price down, which we had no clue about, so there was no invalidation signals there. But since the buyers were buying it back up and there was no invalidation signals, it was likely that that was one flush of the long users, and we may still continue towards the upside. Then we start to see all this choppy but still upwards action, which is quite boring, but we're not mad about at all, right? So after that, we make all of this. Nothing has invalidated our trade yet, except for right here, which would be around the area which we do exit, I believe. Yeah, we exit here, I believe. And you might be wondering, why do we exit there? Let's take a look on Bookmap, right? As we're coming up to this 5475 level, what is price doing? Price is creating barriers away from this level, which is indicating towards the downside, right? So we do not exit here. Why? Because look at the barrier, right? It's not that strong enough for us to identify if it really is an invalidation signal, right? And as we have came down, we created this barrier and we actually held this barrier very nicely. Now, if we broke this barrier, we likely would have got out, as that is pretty big invalidation, which would have still secured us some profits. But since we held this barrier so nicely, we held on to the trade until this barrier started to form, which was much more high impact barrier, which does indicate large seller introduction passively, which makes me exit the trade. Another reason for my exit on the trade at that point was because I had to go to school and I cannot trade during school. So we exited right before school, which happened to be a perfect time to exit, right? And time where we saw was up here. So it's unfortunate that we carried on to the same profit that occurred in the first 5 to 10 minutes, but we are grateful that we identified invalidation signals here in which we took nice profits. Additionally, after we did see that very volatile and sudden sweep down without any invalidation signals, the barrier held nicely below, which was our original confluence. So we moved our stop up above that relative barrier area when we had more of a clue where it was, to around 175 ticks, which gave us around a 1.6 risk to reward ratio, which is pretty good in this modern day. And after that invalidation, we come back up to that level again and start falling down again, right? On the 15-minute, it still looks very choppy, but right after we saw this big breakage towards the downside, it was pretty clear that we are going to continue towards the downside, right? And we're likely going to take all of this liquidity down below because this was a massive area of high volume. So this liquidity is very apparent. And if you take a look at to what happened in the evening Asia session market open, was we gapped very heavily towards the downside, essentially sweeping all this liquidity right here, which does make actually both of our analyses from yesterday correct on what I've got. Let me double check what I got, but it does look very, very, very great. Yeah, so let me show you guys what I had yesterday in the prior night session, right? I had that we're either going to go up to these 1 hour or head down to these levels. And what did we do? We did both of them. We first headed up to here, and what did we have? We did have a long bias because of confluences on the VIX and ES as well. So we did have a long bias, but it was not very strong, and there was some indication that we're gonna head towards the downside. So what did we do on the markets? We headed up to this supply zone and then headed down, breaking all this liquidity down here. You can find all these resources on the Discord server, all for completely free, and I highly recommend you guys to join. The link is in the description down below. Now, that's essentially all I have here for today. I know this could seem a bit confusing because of the way I worded things, but I tried my best to show you why this trade succeeded and how we got pretty good exit and managed our risk throughout the trade. Now, if you have any questions, please join the Discord or leave a comment down below. I'll try to do my best to answer there as well. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your day. I'll see you guys likely tomorrow for another market analysis or trade recap session if I do see any opportunities. Goodbye.